The lady who died, reading her own story. Miss Marple Tales. Dear friends, we are so glad to welcome you once again. I'm Patrick, and I am absolutely delighted to have your company this evening. A heartfelt greeting tonight to our listeners in Canada, the USA, and Cyprus. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from, and tell us what is the most beautiful village or countryside you've ever visited. If you are enjoying our cozy mysteries, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Settle in, get comfortable, and now let the story unfold. Disclaimer: this video is an original fanfiction inspired by the classic mystery style of Miss Marple. It is not an official Miss Marple story. All dialogue, plot, narration, and creative content are original and created by this channel. Chapter 1. The Sentence That Killed Her Lady Beatrice. Vale had read only 7 words of the sentence describing her own death when her voice stopped. Not weakened, not faltered, stopped. For one extraordinary second, nobody in the library of Ashcombe House moved. Lady Beatrice sat upright in the high-backed chair beside the fire, her silver hair bright beneath the reading lamp, one hand supporting the manuscript and the other resting against its lower edge. 6 guests had been listening in various degrees of discomfort, fascination, and alarm. Miss Jane Marple, seated somewhat apart with her knitting folded untouched in her lap, had been watching the listeners rather more closely than she had been listening to the story. Then the manuscript slipped. It struck the carpet with a whisper. Lady Beatrice followed it. Her body seemed to fold inward before pitching sideways against the arm of the chair. Eleanor Vale screamed. Dr. Stephen Bell was already moving. He crossed the room so quickly that he knocked a small table with his knee. The glass upon it trembled but did not spill. He bent over Beatrice, lifted one eyelid, felt at her wrist, and then at her throat. Major Adrian Fane stood rigid by the fireplace. Clara Wren, Beatrice's secretary, had gone so white that even her lips seemed drained of colour. Mrs. Lydia Crow whispered, "No." Arthur Pell, the publisher, stared at the manuscript lying on the carpet. Then he said something that would be repeated many times during the next 24 hours. My God, she died exactly as the woman in the story died. Nobody answered him. Outside, wind pressed softly at the black panes of the library windows. Ashcombe Village lay half a mile beyond the estate gates, its church tower invisible in the mist that had gathered after sunset. Inside, the room smelled of old leather, wood smoke, and the faint lavender scent Lady Beatrice always wore. Dr. Bell straightened. She's dead. Eleanor made a sound like someone attempting to breathe through pain. No. Stephen, no. You must do something. There is nothing to do. But she was speaking. I know. She cannot simply. Eleanor. His tone stopped her. Arthur Pell bent to retrieve the manuscript. Don't touch it, said Miss Marple. The publisher's hand remained suspended. He looked at her. Until that moment, Arthur Pell had treated Jane Marple with the tolerant courtesy fashionable men sometimes showed elderly ladies whose presence had not been properly explained. He was a handsome, smooth-faced man in his early 50s, his dark dinner jacket immaculate, his thinning hair arranged with care. Why ever not? Miss Marple glanced at the dead woman. Because, she said mildly, it appears to be the most important object in the room. Inspector Julian Harcourt arrived from Market Basing shortly before 10. He was a tall, narrow man with a melancholy face and the permanent expression of someone whose supper had been interrupted by other people's foolishness. By then, the library had been sealed. No one had left Ashcombe House. The telephone call had been made by Clara Wren under Dr. Bell's supervision, and the servants had been instructed to remain below stairs. Harcourt listened first to Dr. Bell. Sudden cardiac failure? Possibly. I will not certify without examination. Beatrice had a heart irregularity, but nothing I regarded as immediately dangerous. Was she taking medication? Yes. Where is it? In the cabinet beside her bedroom. Anything she took tonight? Dr. Bell hesitated. A digestive lozenge, perhaps. She often used one before reading aloud. She complained that lengthy readings dried her throat and unsettled her stomach. Did you see her take one? No. Miss Marple's needles remained still in her hands. Harcourt noticed. "You have something to add, Miss Marple?" "Oh no, not really." Harcourt had met Jane Marple twice before, and therefore knew that this meant she had something to add, but did not yet think he deserved it. He turned to the others. "Lady Beatrice was reading from a manuscript," Clara answered. "Her last novel. Published? No. Who had read it?" "No one had read the complete version, except Lady Beatrice and me." Arthur Pell gave a short laugh. "As her publisher, I knew the general subject." "The general subject?" Clara looked at him sharply. "Lady Beatrice's final novel," she explained, "concerned a fictional country house called Ravenmere and a 22-year-old death that had officially been judged an accident. On the afternoon before the gathering, Beatrice had announced that the novel was no longer entirely fictional. She said," Clara continued, "that every person invited tonight would recognize something about themselves." "Yes." Harcourt looked around the room. "That must have been pleasant." Nobody smiled. "What exactly was Lady Beatrice reading when she died?" Arthur Pell pointed at the manuscript. "The scene where the woman realizes her murderer is in the room. More precisely." Pell closed his eyes, remembering. She had spent a lifetime inventing deaths for strangers, yet when death came for her, it waited patiently between the pages she herself had written. "Then there was something about looking up and understanding," Lydia Crow interrupted. "That isn't what she said." Every face turned toward her. Lydia sat in a straight chair near the wall. She was a large, plainly dressed woman with iron-grey hair and capable hands. She owned the dressmaking shop beside the post office in Ashcombe Village and was generally believed to know everyone's measurements and half their secrets. Pell frowned. "I beg your pardon?" Those were not her last words. They were certainly the passage. "No." Lydia's voice trembled. She had gone past that. Arthur stared at her. "I was listening." "So was I." "What do you remember?" Harcourt asked. Lydia swallowed. "Something about a clock. The clock had not yet struck, or perhaps the clock would never strike. I don't know." Then she stopped. Clara looked bewildered. "I thought she had just read the death sentence too." "You thought it after Mr. Pell said it," Lydia replied. The silence changed. Not greatly, but Miss Marple felt it. Harcourt bent and examined the fallen manuscript without lifting it. Page 86 lay uppermost. A line had been marked lightly in pencil. He read it aloud, and so she understood, in the final instant, that the story had never been about the dead girl at all. It had been written for the murderer. Eleanor shivered. "That's horrible." "Is that the sentence?" Harcourt asked. Arthur Pell stepped nearer. "No. Turn the page." Harcourt did so using the edge of a pencil. At the top of page 87 appeared the passage Pell had quoted. There was a faint brown smudge near one corner. Harcourt looked toward Clara. "Did you type this?" "Yes. I type all Lady Beatrice's manuscripts." "Every page?" "Every final page." Miss Marple had moved closer. She looked down at page 87. "Such a very neat machine," she murmured. Clara glanced at her. "My typewriter?" "Yes. Rather a nice, clear little E." Arthur Pell made an impatient sound. "Surely the important matter is how Beatrice died." "Very likely," Miss Marple agreed, yet her gaze remained on the page. The medical examiner arrived just after midnight. By 1:30, Inspector Harcourt had what he described as an unpleasant probability. Lady Beatrice had not died naturally. Something had entered her body before the reading. Something potent, something administered perhaps 20 or 30 minutes before her collapse. The untouched water glass beside her had contained nothing suspicious. The decanter had been shared by 3 people. Dinner had been eaten communally. No one else was ill. Harcourt returned to the library. Who was alone with Lady Beatrice between dinner and the reading? No one answered immediately. Then Eleanor said, "I was." Clara looked at her. "When?" "At about 8:20. You never said." "It was private." "Private matters," said Harcourt, "have acquired an unfortunate importance." Eleanor's chin lifted. Lady Beatrice had summoned her to the small morning room after dinner. They had quarrelled. About money? No. Then about what? Eleanor hesitated. My father. Major Fane turned from the fire. Dr. Bell stared at the floor. Arthur Pell's expression became suddenly blank. Miss Marple noticed all three reactions. What about your father? Harcourt asked. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed hard. My aunt told me that tomorrow morning she intended to publish the truth about something that happened 22 years ago. Lydia Crowe closed her eyes. What happened 22 years ago? Harcourt asked. No one answered. Then from the doorway came the voice of Clara Wren. I think, she said, you had better ask about Rosamond Lee. A log shifted in the grate. Sparks rose briefly. Inspector Harcourt looked from one face to another. Who was Rosamond Lee? Clara's reply was barely audible. The woman whose death destroyed this house the first time, and in the chair beside the fire, Lady Beatrice Vale seemed almost to be listening. Chapter 2. 6 people in the story. By breakfast, everyone in Ashcombe House had lied at least once. Miss Marple did not find this surprising. People lied about murder, certainly, but they also lied about love, money, vanity, embarrassment, old grudges, new hats, telephone calls, and whether they had enjoyed dinner. The difficulty was not discovering dishonesty. The difficulty was identifying which lie mattered. Inspector Harcourt began with Rosamond Lee. 22 years earlier, Rosamond had been 26, unmarried, attractive, and employed at Ashcombe as companion to Beatrice's widowed sister-in-law, Margaret Vale. Rosamond had died on an October evening. Her body had been found at the foot of the old stone steps behind the disused orangery. There had been no witnesses. A storm had broken that night, smearing footprints and washing blood from the stones. The inquest concluded that she had fallen. Ashcombe Village reached a more interesting conclusion. Rosamond Lee, it was whispered, had been having an affair with Edmund Vale, Beatrice's married brother and Eleanor's father. Edmund denied it. Margaret Vale left Ashcombe 6 months later and died abroad. Edmund survived another 14 years. He never remarried. Was there evidence of an affair? Harcourt asked Major Fane. The Major's face tightened. There were letters. From Edmund? No. Then from whom? Fane said nothing. Lydia Crowe answered. From Adrian. The Major turned sharply. That was not yours to tell. My sister has been dead 22 years. I have grown rather tired of allowing gentlemen to decide what belongs to them. Harcourt looked between them. Rosamond was your sister? My younger sister. And Major Fane? Was in love with her. Fane gave a bitter little laugh. That is one way of putting it. He had been 39 then, recently returned from military service overseas, engaged informally to a woman his family considered suitable. Rosamond had not been suitable. I intended to marry her. Did she intend to marry you? I believed so, but 3 days before her death, she ended it. Why? I never knew. Did you see her the evening she died? Fane looked directly at Harcourt. Yes. Lydia's fingers tightened in her lap. You told the inquest you had not. I lied. The admission settled heavily. Fane said he had met Rosamond near the orangery at 7. She had been frightened. Not of him. Of something she had discovered. What? She wouldn't tell me. She said it concerned the Vale family, and that if she had any sense she'd leave Ashcombe before morning. Did you quarrel? Yes. About her ending the relationship? Yes. Did you touch her? No. How long were you together? 10 minutes. And when you left? She was alive. Inspector Harcourt wrote without expression. Miss Marple watched Eleanor. The young woman looked less shocked than one might expect. She had heard at least some of this before. Clara Wren was next. At 38, Clara had an unobtrusive prettiness easily overlooked beside Eleanor's striking dark beauty. She had worked for Beatrice for 11 years. Her father, Leonard Wren, had been the Vale family's solicitor at the time of Rosamond's death. Did your father have any connection to the inquest? He handled family matters afterward. What sort of family matters? I don't know. You told Lady Beatrice yesterday you were altering her manuscript. Clara went still. Harcourt had found the evidence in the wastebasket in the secretary's office. 3 typed pages, torn through the middle. I corrected a passage. Without her permission? Yes. Why? Because it was cruel. To whom? Clara looked at Eleanor. Eleanor's face changed. "Don't," she whispered. Harcourt leaned back. "Now I am particularly interested." Clara clasped her hands. In Lady Beatrice's manuscript, there was a child. The daughter of the great house. The story suggested that the child's father was not the man everyone believed. Eleanor stood abruptly. "That's enough. Sit down, Miss Vale. My parentage has nothing to do with my aunt's death. Someone killed her after she announced she was going to reveal old secrets. I will decide what has something to do with it." Eleanor sat. Clara continued reluctantly. The original page contained details close enough to the real family history that people would have assumed Lady Beatrice meant Eleanor. So you changed it. I changed daughter to niece and removed 2 lines. Could Lady Beatrice not have changed them back? She might have, but I wanted her to see how unnecessary it was. Did she know? Not before yesterday afternoon. And then? She was furious. Arthur Pell gave an unattractive smile. Beatrice regarded alteration of her prose as a hanging offence. Clara ignored him. Harcourt looked at the manuscript. "Did you alter page 87? No. The page describing the woman dying during the reading? No. You're certain?" "Absolutely." That interested Miss Marple. After luncheon, she asked Harcourt if she might see Clara's typewriter. He took her to the secretary's office. The machine stood on a walnut desk beneath a window overlooking the yew garden. Miss Marple inserted a sheet of paper. She typed several letters. Then she asked for page 87. Harcourt watched her compare them. "The key?" he asked. "And the key Clara's machine has a little nick in the lower loop. Page 87 hasn't." "No, someone else typed it." "Yes, but Beatrice could have." "Did she own another machine?" Clara, called back into the room, shook her head. "She wrote longhand. I typed. Old drafts?" Pell and Company sometimes had portions retyped for proof preparation. Harcourt frowned. "Mr. Pell's office." Miss Marple folded her hands. "Perhaps." The inspector gave her a look. "You dislike easy answers. They so often dislike us first." Later that afternoon, Dr. Bell produced Beatrice's medical cabinet. Nothing obvious was missing. Her heart tablets were intact. Her digestive lozenges came from a silver box containing 7 small white discs. "How many should there be?" Harcourt asked. 8, said Eleanor. Every eye turned toward her. She flushed. "I bought them for her last week." The chemist puts 8 in a paper packet. Aunt always emptied them into that box. How do you know she hadn't already taken one? "I don't." "Then the missing lozenge may be perfectly ordinary." "Yes," Miss Marple asked. "Did Lady Beatrice always take one before reading aloud?" Arthur Pell answered before Dr. Bell. "Always." Harcourt's head turned. Pell appeared not to notice. Beatrice hated coughing in public. She'd take 10 minutes before any lecture or reading. Dr. Bell said, "Closer to 20 minutes usually." Pell shrugged. "I've heard her read often enough." Miss Marple lowered her eyes. That evening, the manuscript was examined page by page. Only one sheet differed physically from the rest. Page 87. Same weight, same cream tint, but a different watermark. Pell and Company. Harcourt carried the sheet into the drawing room. Arthur Pell looked at it once and smiled. "That proves nothing. We use that paper for author corrections. It proves the page came through your office. Or from Beatrice. She had plenty of our paper." Clara shook her head. "Not in this house." Pell's smile disappeared. Then Lydia Crow spoke from the window. "There is something else." She held a book in her hands. Not Beatrice's manuscript. An older novel. Lady Beatrice's famous The Winter Guest, published 19 years earlier. Lydia opened it to a marked passage. "I read this last night because something bothered me." She passed the book to Harcourt. The inspector read silently, then aloud. She had spent a lifetime writing deaths for strangers, but when death came for her, it waited quietly among the words she had made. The room went silent. The phrase on page 87 was almost identical. Arthur Pell stared. Clara whispered, "She reused it." "No," Lydia said. Lady Beatrice hated repeating herself. Miss Marple looked at the publisher. Arthur Pell's face had lost its colour. Harcourt said slowly, Then whoever prepared page 87 copied an old sentence and inserted it into the new manuscript. The impossible coincidence had not been written by Lady Beatrice at all. Someone had manufactured it, and whoever had done so must have known that before the evening ended, Lady Beatrice Vale would be dead. Chapter 3. The Page That Wasn't There. The murderer had written a death before committing one. That, Inspector Harcourt said the following morning, was the first fact in the case that could not be explained by grief, embarrassment, or bad memory. Page 87 had been typed in advance. It had been inserted into the manuscript before Lady Beatrice began reading. Its most dramatic sentence had been lifted, with alterations, from an old Beatrice Vale novel, and Lady Beatrice herself almost certainly had not created it. The question, Harcourt told Miss Marple over coffee, is who had access. Everyone in a country house has access to everything, Miss Marple said. The real question is who believes they haven't. Harcourt sighed. I had hoped you might become less cryptic with age. Oh, I think one becomes worse. The manuscript had been kept in Beatrice's study until shortly before dinner. Clara had left it on the central desk at 6:15. Between then and 8:45, when Beatrice carried it into the library, the study had not been locked. Eleanor had entered twice. Dr. Bell had used the room telephone. Major Fane claimed not to have gone near it. Lydia had passed through to reach the terrace. Arthur Pell had been in the billiard room across the hall. So virtually anyone, Harcourt said. Exactly. But the Pell and Company paper points toward Pell. It does. And therefore I should be very careful of it. Harcourt looked pained. The post-mortem brought a clearer answer regarding the method of death. Lady Beatrice had swallowed a powerful toxic substance. Not in her dinner, not in the shared wine, probably in a small medicated sweet or lozenge taken within 40 minutes of death. The silver box in her evening bag became important. Arthur Pell became more important. He knew her habit. So did Eleanor. So did Clara. Dr. Bell had medical knowledge. Major Fane had once owned a pharmaceutical manufacturing company before the war, though he described his involvement as financial rather than technical. Lydia Crowe said she had not known about the lozenges at all. Harcourt questioned Arthur first. Did you type page 87? No. Could someone in your office have typed it? Of course. At your instruction? No. Have you read Lady Beatrice's current manuscript? Not fully. Which parts? An early synopsis. 3 chapters last spring. Page 87. No. You recognized the death passage immediately. I recognized what she'd just read. Lydia Crowe says she didn't read it. Lydia is mistaken. Miss Wren is uncertain. Shock affects memory. It does. Pell leaned forward. Inspector, you're attempting to turn an ordinary observation into guilt. No, I'm attempting to determine how ordinary it was. Arthur's eyes hardened. For 26 years, I published Beatrice Vale. I knew her habits, her rhythms, the tricks she used. If I recognized a dramatic passage, it is because I've spent half my life listening to them. Miss Marple was in the window seat with her knitting. Arthur glanced toward her. Surely you understand that, Miss Marple. Writers repeat themselves. People repeat themselves much more, Miss Marple said. Pell stared. She smiled. Little phrases, little habits, the same excuse when they're late, the same story when they're frightened. Pell stood. I have nothing else to say. When he had gone, Harcourt said, You were provoking him. Yes. Why? I wanted to see whether he would look at the manuscript. Did he? No. Meaning, he is afraid of it. Harcourt drummed his fingers on the desk. The next surprise came from Clara. She requested to speak privately. I lied yesterday. Harcourt closed his eyes briefly. Everyone has. I lied about the number of pages I altered. How many? 5. Why? The same reason. Protecting Eleanor? Partly. From what? Clara looked exhausted. Lady Beatrice had become obsessed with Rosamond's death. During the past year, she found papers among her brother's effects. Old letters, statements, notes my father had written, about the inquest, about what happened afterward. What did your father know? Clara's lower lip trembled. Enough to be ashamed. Leonard Wren, she explained, had found a letter in Rosamond's room after her death. It was addressed to Beatrice. Wren gave it to Beatrice privately rather than to the police. What did it say? I don't know. Lady Beatrice never showed me. But your father knew. Yes. And suppressed evidence. Yes. Why? Because Beatrice asked him to. Harcourt was silent. So your father committed an offence to protect Lady Beatrice? Yes. What did you remove from the manuscript? A passage naming the solicitor who hid Rosamond's final letter. I couldn't bear having my father's name dragged through newspapers when he has been dead 12 years. Did Beatrice threaten to restore it? Yes. Did you hate her? Clara's face changed. For an hour. Only an hour? Then I remembered how many times I'd hated her for an hour. It was such an honest answer that Harcourt almost smiled. Miss Marple did. Clara rose. At the door, she stopped. There was something odd yesterday. Harcourt looked up. At about 7:30, I went to Lady Beatrice's study. The manuscript was no longer square on the blotter, meaning she always aligned papers perfectly. The pages were slightly crooked. Did you check them? No. Why not? I assumed Beatrice had been there. Was she? No. I later learned she was upstairs dressing. Who else was nearby? Clara thought. Mr. Pell came out of the billiard room as I left. Harcourt's expression sharpened. Arthur Pell was summoned again. He denied entering the study. Major Fane, however, remembered seeing Pell near the study door. Pell accused Fane of lying. Fane replied that he had disliked Pell for 20 years and had never needed to invent reasons. The argument was interrupted by Eleanor. She had been searching Beatrice's desk for her aunt's will. Instead, she found a sealed envelope. Across it, Beatrice had written, "To be opened if I do not finish the reading." Harcourt slit it open. Inside was a single sheet. "My dear Jane, if you are reading this, then I have either lost my courage or someone else has lost theirs. The story is not an accusation, it is a confession. Please remember that distinction. People are sometimes willing to forgive a crime committed long ago. They are much less willing to forgive the lie that has allowed them to profit from it. Do not trust the final chapter unless I read it aloud myself." B.V. Harcourt read it twice. Then he handed it to Miss Marple. Eleanor whispered, "A confession to what?" Nobody answered. Miss Marple examined the handwriting. At the bottom of the page was a faint indentation. Something had rested upon the paper when Beatrice wrote the note. A second sheet. Miss Marple angled it toward the lamp. A few impressed words became visible. Not enough for a sentence. Only 3 fragments. Rosamond did not fall. I moved. Arthur knows. Inspector Harcourt stared at the final 2 words. Across the room, the door stood open. Arthur Pell was no longer there. Chapter 4. A death. 22 years earlier. Arthur Pell was found in the wine cellar with a suitcase. He claimed this was coincidence. Inspector Harcourt did not. "I was leaving," Pell said. "At 6 in the morning. I have work in London. Your car is blocked behind 2 police vehicles. I intended to ask, without telling anyone you were packing." Arthur's patience cracked. "I am not under arrest." "Not yet." Pell's eyes flicked toward Miss Marple. "I suppose the old lady has decided I did it." Miss Marple looked mildly surprised. "I haven't decided anything." "How reassuring." "What do you know about Rosamond Lee?" Harcourt asked. "Almost nothing." Lady Beatrice wrote, "Arthur knows." "Arthur is not an uncommon name." Harcourt simply looked at him. Pell exhaled. "I knew Beatrice had some guilty secret concerning Rosamond, that is all." "How?" "She told me years ago." "When?" "Not precisely." "Try." Pell rubbed his forehead. "Perhaps 18 years ago. We had been arguing over a book. She had drunk too much. She said something about having ruined one woman and making a fortune pretending to understand human wickedness." "Did she say she killed Rosamond?" "No." "Did you blackmail her?" Pell looked genuinely astonished. "Certainly not." The denial was too quick. Miss Marple noticed Harcourt notice it. That morning, the inspector sent a constable to London to search Pell and Company's records and requested old banking information. At Ashcombe, Miss Marple went walking with Lydia Crow. The winter garden was colourless, except for holly berries and a stubborn cluster of white chrysanthemums beside the kitchen wall. "You knew Rosamond best," Miss Marple said. "I thought I did." "Those are often the dangerous words." Lydia stopped. "My sister was not foolish. I didn't imagine she was. People said Adrian Fane ruined her. They said Edmund Vale ruined her. People always want a man to have ruined a woman. It makes the story tidier." "What ruined her?" "Fear." "Of whom?" Lydia looked toward the house. "Beatrice." Miss Marple said nothing. Lydia continued. "Beatrice and Rosamond had been friends once, real friends, not mistress and companion. Rosamond read Beatrice's early drafts. Beatrice trusted her judgment more than anyone's." "What changed?" "Edmund. Rosamond loved him." "No." That surprised Miss Marple. Lydia gave a sad smile. "That is the part everyone got wrong. Edmund loved Rosamond. Rosamond loved Adrian. Then why did she end matters with Major Fane? Because Edmund had told her something." "What?" "I never knew." 3 nights before Rosamond died, she had come to Lydia's cottage and asked whether one could be guilty of stealing something if the thing had never belonged to the person claiming it. Lydia thought she meant money. The next day, Rosamond changed her mind about marrying Adrian. The following evening she died. "Did Beatrice quarrel with her?" "I heard them." "Where?" "Near the orangery." Lydia's voice became strained. "I was walking up from the village. I heard Beatrice say, 'You will not take that from me.' Rosamond said, 'It was never yours.'" "Did you see them?" "No." "Why did you not tell the police?" "Because when they found Rosamond, I became frightened. Beatrice came to me before the inquest. She said my sister had been confused, that scandal would only hurt the living. And you believed her?" "No." "Then why remain silent?" Lydia stared at the bare roses. "Because Beatrice showed me a letter." "From Rosamond?" "Supposedly." "What did it say?" "That Rosamond intended to leave Ashcombe and never see Adrian again. That she had done something unforgivable. You thought it a suicide letter." "That is what Beatrice wanted me to think." "Did you?" "For 20 years. And now? Now I think Beatrice wrote it." The case widened. The old letter had disappeared. Leonard Wren's private papers contained no copy. Major Fane admitted Rosamond had written to him on the afternoon of her death, asking to meet at 7. The letter still existed. He had kept it. Harcourt read it aloud in the library. "Adrian, I know now why she has always been afraid of the truth. I have something that belongs to her only because she took it. If I give it back, I lose everything. If I keep it, she may destroy me. Come at 7. After tonight, I mean to leave Ashcombe, but I do not mean to leave as a coward." "What was the thing?" Harcourt asked. Fane shook his head. "She would not tell me." "Did you search for it after her death?" "Yes." "Where?" "Her room." Lydia turned on him. "You searched her room?" "Beatrice asked me to." "Why?" "She said Rosamond had stolen family papers." "And did you find them?" "No." Miss Marple had been thinking. "What did Lady Beatrice write before she became famous?" Arthur Pell, still under watch, answered from the sofa. 3 novels that sold respectably." "Why?" "Did Rosamond help with them?" Pell shrugged. "Most authors claim no one helps them." "That wasn't my question." Clara spoke. "There were rumours." Every head turned. "Among old correspondence," Clara said, "I found letters from Beatrice to Rosamond. She discussed plots, characters, whole scenes." "Collaboration?" Harcourt asked. "More than collaboration, perhaps." Pell became very still. Miss Marple understood first. "Oh," she said softly. Eleanor looked bewildered. "What?" Miss Marple looked toward the shelves covering the far wall. Hundreds of copies of Beatrice Vale's books stood there, a lifetime of celebrated mysteries. "Suppose," she said, "Rosamond had not stolen money. Suppose she had stolen nothing at all. Suppose the thing belonging to Beatrice, only because Beatrice had taken it, was something that could not be locked in a safe. An idea, a manuscript, a reputation." Clara went to Beatrice's desk. In the lowest drawer, they found an old exercise book tied with ribbon. Rosamond Lee's handwriting filled the pages. The opening chapter bore a title, The Winter Guest, the book that had made Beatrice Vale famous. Lydia sank into a chair. Eleanor whispered, "Aunt Beatrice stole her novel." "At least part of it," Miss Marple said. Arthur Pell stood abruptly. Harcourt stepped in front of the door. "Sit down." Pell did not. For the first time, his polished composure vanished. "You don't understand." Miss Marple looked at him. "I think Lady Beatrice feared somebody eventually would." Pell's mouth tightened. Harcourt said, "You knew." "No. You knew Rosamond wrote The Winter Guest." I said no. "And Lady Beatrice knew you knew." Pell said nothing. At that moment, Clara, who had been turning the exercise book pages, gave a faint cry. Between two leaves lay a photograph. It showed Rosamond Lee standing beside the orangery steps. Next to her was a much younger Beatrice, and behind them, partly caught by the camera, stood a thin young man. Arthur Pell. On the back, in Rosamond's handwriting, were 6 words. "Arthur has promised to tell her." The photograph had been taken 3 days before Rosamond died. Chapter 5. The Witness Who Remembered Too Much. Arthur Pell's first useful statement began with the words, "I was 29 and stupid." Miss Marple reflected that age was one of the few excuses people offered more generously for their former selves than for anyone else's. Pell sat in the morning room with Harcourt opposite him. "I was working for Calder and Finch then," he said, "a small publishing house. Beatrice had submitted a novel. Rosamond contacted me privately." "The Winter Guest?" "Yes. She claimed she wrote it?" "Large parts. The structure, the central trick, several chapters." "Did you believe her?" "I saw drafts in her handwriting." "And what did you do?" "I told her to confront Beatrice." "Why not your employer?" Pell laughed without amusement. "Because Calder and Finch wanted Beatrice Vale. She had money, social connections, reviews. Rosamond Lee was a companion with no literary reputation. I knew what would happen." "So you advised her to settle privately?" "Yes." "What did Rosamond want?" "Credit. Half the royalties." "And an apology." "Did Beatrice agree?" "At first. Then, the day Rosamond died, Beatrice telephoned me. She said the arrangement was impossible. Rosamond was threatening to expose her." "Were you at Ashcombe that evening?" Pell looked at the photograph. "Yes. You told us you knew almost nothing." "I lied. We noticed." Pell's jaw tightened. "I arrived shortly after 6. Beatrice asked me to persuade Rosamond to be reasonable." "Did you?" "I spoke to her briefly. She was furious. She said she had another manuscript, proving their partnership." "What manuscript?" "I never saw it." "When did you leave?" "About 6:30. Rosamond died after 7. "Yes." "Why conceal this?" "Because I have spent 26 years publishing Beatrice Vale. If the truth becomes public, every newspaper in the country will ask how much I knew." "How much did you know?" "That Rosamond contributed substantially to 1 book." "Only 1?" Pell hesitated. Miss Marple looked up from her knitting. Arthur gave her a resentful glance. "Perhaps 2. "Perhaps?" Harcourt asked. 2. The second was Death at Candlemas, Beatrice's next major success. Both books had been written before Rosamond died. Afterward, Beatrice's style changed. Readers called it maturity. Miss Marple thought there were kinder words for theft. Pell continued. "I never blackmailed her." Harcourt pushed Beatrice's note across the table. "Arthur knows." "Then what did those words mean?" "I knew about Rosamond's writing." "Did Lady Beatrice pay you to remain silent?" "Royalties and publishing payments passed through my firm. Nothing improper." "That was not my question." "No." Harcourt did not believe him. Neither did Miss Marple. But disbelief was not proof. The second copy of Beatrice's manuscript appeared just before luncheon. It was found under Eleanor's mattress. Only chapters 6 through 9 had been copied. The pages included the family scandal, Clara's father's concealment of the letter, and a passage suggesting Edmund Vale had fathered a child outside his marriage. Eleanor denied stealing them. Clara admitted making the copy. For whom? Harcourt asked. "Eleanor, you gave them to her?" "No, I intended to." Eleanor stared. "Then how did they get into my room?" Clara looked genuinely frightened. "I don't know." Someone, Harcourt concluded, was arranging evidence, either against Eleanor, against Clara, or both? The house had begun to feel less like a country residence and more like a stage on which several plays were being performed at once. That afternoon, Miss Marple asked Lydia to describe Beatrice's collapse again. "Don't try to remember what others have told you," she said. "Only what you saw." Lydia closed her eyes. She was reading. Eleanor was near the French windows. Adrian had his back to the fire. Mr. Pell sat closest to Beatrice. How close? Perhaps 6 feet. Dr. Bell, near the bookcase. Clara, beside the writing desk. And you, near the door. What did Beatrice say? Lydia frowned. Something about the clock. Before that? I don't know. After she stopped? The papers fell. And then? Eleanor screamed. Dr. Bell ran forward. "Mr. Pell, he said the thing about her dying, like the woman in the story. When did he say it?" "Before Dr. Bell said Beatrice was dead." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Are you sure?" "Yes." That was interesting. Arthur had declared the literary coincidence before the doctor confirmed death. Not impossible, but interesting. Miss Marple next questioned Clara. "Did Lady Beatrice number her pages?" "Yes." "Before or after typing?" "I typed the number. Page 87 included?" "No, I told you. I know. What I mean is, the inserted page had the number 87 typed upon it." "Yes." "Would anyone know page 87 belonged at that point?" "Only someone who had seen the manuscript, or counted pages, I suppose." "Did Mr. Pell ever receive a copy?" "No." "Could he have seen proof pages?" "Not from me." Miss Marple took the suspicious sheet from its protective folder. "There's an expression here." Her pulse beat like a trapped bird. "Does Lady Beatrice use that sort of phrase?" Clara frowned. "Not usually." "Does Mr. Pell?" "I wouldn't know." Miss Marple smiled. "Neither would I." At tea, Arthur Pell made a mistake. It was tiny, so tiny that Harcourt missed it at first. They were discussing the missing original final chapter. Harcourt said, "Lady Beatrice warned us not to trust the ending unless she read it aloud." Pell replied impatiently, she never intended to read the confession scene aloud. The teacup stopped halfway to Clara's mouth. Harcourt looked at him. "What confession scene?" Arthur froze. "The final chapter, which you told us you had never read. I assumed. You said, the confession scene, because of her note." "The note says only that the story is a confession. It says nothing about a scene." Arthur set down his cup. Miss Marple watched his right hand. A faint tremor had begun in 2 fingers. Harcourt's voice became very quiet. "You have read more of the manuscript than you admitted." "No." "Then explain your words." Arthur stood. "I refuse to be bullied over semantics." He left the room. Dr. Bell watched him go. "He's frightened." "So are you," Miss Marple said. Bell turned. She smiled apologetically. "Forgive me. One notices these things." Bell's expression softened. Beatrice had a talent for making fear contagious. "Did she frighten you 22 years ago?" The doctor's face changed. "I was not her doctor then, but you were in Ashcombe." He did not answer. That evening, Harcourt received a telegram from London. Pell and Company's accountant had uncovered irregular payments, extending back 17 years. Every January, Beatrice Vale transferred a large private sum into an account controlled by Arthur Pell. The payments were not royalties. They were not investments. They had risen steadily as Beatrice's fame increased. Blackmail. Harcourt read the figures aloud. Arthur Pell sat expressionless. "Well?" Pell finally said yes. Lydia drew in her breath. Eleanor looked ill. Clara closed her eyes. "What did you blackmail her about?" Harcourt asked. Arthur's smile was thin and exhausted. "You already know." "The stolen novels?" "Yes." "For 17 years?" "Yes." "Did she threaten to stop paying?" "Yesterday." Harcourt leaned forward. "At what time?" "Before dinner." "And what did she say?" Pell looked toward Miss Marple. For the first time, something like fear entered his eyes. "She said, tomorrow, everyone would know the truth," Harcourt said, "giving you a very considerable motive for murder." Arthur laughed once. "Then arrest me." "I may." "But before you do," Pell said, "ask Dr. Bell why his father changed the time on Rosamond Lee's death certificate." No one moved. Dr. Bell's face had gone grey. Arthur looked at him. "You see, Inspector, I wasn't the only person Beatrice paid to keep quiet." Chapter 6. The Murder Inside the Murder. The death certificate had been altered by 45 minutes. That small correction, buried in a file for 22 years, changed almost every alibi connected to Rosamond Lee's death. The original handwritten medical note placed death between 7 and 7:15. The official certificate said approximately 8. Dr. Stephen Bell sat opposite Harcourt and seemed to age while the inspector spoke. "My father changed it. Why? I don't know. Mr. Pell says Lady Beatrice paid him. Arthur Pell would say anything. Did Lady Beatrice pay your father?" Stephen looked toward the window. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "Stephen." He turned to her. "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" "Your father." Edmund Vale, it emerged, had arrived at Ashcombe at 7:30 on the night Rosamond died. Under the official time, he had been present before her death. Under the original medical estimate, he had arrived afterward. Beatrice wanted suspicion kept on Edmund, Stephen said. Major Fane stared at him. Why would she want her own brother suspected? She didn't want him charged, she wanted uncertainty. To hide someone else. Yes. Whom? Stephen shook his head. I never knew. His father had told him only that Beatrice insisted the time remained broad enough to prevent any single person's movements from becoming decisive. Did your father know how Rosamond died? Harcourt asked. He said the injuries were consistent with a fall. Consistent is not the same as certain. No. Could she have been pushed? Yes. The old case, rather than becoming clearer, seemed to fracture. But Miss Marple had become more interested in the present one. She asked to examine Lady Beatrice's evening bag again. Inside were a handkerchief, compact, fountain pen, silver lozenge box, and a small ivory page marker. Did she always carry the lozenges herself? Miss Marple asked. Clara said yes. Where was the bag before the reading? In the drawing room after dinner. Unattended? For a few minutes. Who remained there? Eleanor said. I did. Arthur Pell said. So did I. Dr. Bell added. I came through. 3 suspects. Miss Marple sighed. Murderers do so dislike being considerate. Harcourt opened the silver box. 7 lozenges remained. All were chemically harmless. The fatal one had been consumed. No wrapper, no residue, no proof of who placed it there. Yet something bothered Miss Marple. She asked Eleanor, Did your aunt take the box out herself? I think so. Think. I saw her with something silver. Before she began reading. Yes. Did anyone comment? Eleanor frowned. Mr. Pell did. Arthur's head came up. What did I say? You joked that Aunt Beatrice was preparing her voice as though the Archbishop were coming. I say a great many foolish things. That one I remember. Miss Marple resumed knitting. Arthur had noticed Beatrice taking the lozenge. If he had planted the fatal one, he would naturally watch. If he had not, the observation meant little. Fair play clues, Miss Marple often thought, were like village gossip. Their value lay less in existence than in combination. That afternoon, Harcourt reconstructed the reading. Everyone returned to the same seat. The manuscript was replaced by blank paper. Clara stood where she had stood, Fane by the fire, Eleanor near the windows, Lydia by the door, Pell in the armchair, Bell at the bookcase. Harcourt played Beatrice. It was not a flattering performance. She began at 9. He asked. 2 minutes after, Clara said. The mantel clock had struck, Lydia agreed. How long until she collapsed? About 23 minutes, Bell said. Arthur looked at him, closer to 18. 23. How can you be sure? I looked at my watch when she began. Miss Marple glanced at him. Why? I had promised to telephone the hospital at 9:30. Did you? No, under the circumstances. Harcourt wrote it down. They estimated that Beatrice had read approximately 11 pages. Page 87 lay 9 pages into the reading. If she had collapsed 23 minutes after beginning, she had almost certainly read beyond the famous death passage before falling. Lydia had been right. Arthur had been wrong, or had wanted everyone else to be wrong. Harcourt turned on him. You said she died exactly on the sentence. I believed she did. Why? Because the manuscript fell open there. It didn't. It fell open to page 86. I turned it. Arthur stared. Harcourt continued. The death sentence was on page 87. Pell said nothing. Miss Marple looked at him. Shock is such an interesting thing, isn't it? We see what we expect to see. What are you suggesting? Only that perhaps somebody helped everyone know what to expect. Arthur's face tightened. The planted page had not killed Beatrice. It had created the story of her death. That distinction mattered. Someone had poisoned her in advance. Someone had also inserted a theatrical page designed to make the manuscript appear to be the instrument, warning, or supernatural mechanism of the crime. Why? To turn attention toward the old secrets in the novel, to make every person mentioned in it appear equally threatened, to disguise a much simpler motive. Harcourt ordered another search. In Arthur Pell's bedroom, police found nothing. In Clara's room, nothing. In Eleanor's wardrobe, they found the copied manuscript pages. In Lydia's suitcase, Rosamond's old letters to Adrian. In Major Fane's writing case, they discovered a loaded revolver that had not been fired in years. In Dr. Bell's room, they found a small bottle with its label removed. Harcourt carried it downstairs. Bell looked at it and swore. What is it? Harcourt asked. A cardiac preparation. Could it kill? In sufficient quantity, yes. Is it the substance that killed Beatrice? I don't know. The laboratory later said no. The bottle was another red herring. Dr. Bell explained he had removed the label because the medicine belonged to Eleanor. Eleanor looked furious. For palpitations, he said quietly, nothing more. You had no right. I was trying to spare you questioning. By hiding medicine in your room? Yes. Harcourt rubbed his forehead. This house is exhausting. The emotional strain broke something in Eleanor. She left the room crying. Major Fane followed but stopped when she told him not to. Miss Marple watched the Major. There was affection in his face. Not the indulgent fondness of an older family friend. Something deeper, painful. She found him later in the gun room. You care very much for Eleanor. She's Edmund's daughter. Is she? Fane turned. Miss Marple's expression remained gentle. Lady Beatrice's manuscript appears to have questioned it. Fane walked to the window. For a long time he said nothing. Then, Rosamond was expecting a child when she died. Miss Marple felt the final pieces of the old scandal shift again. The child was yours? Yes. But Rosamond died. She had already given birth. Miss Marple stared at him. Fane's voice broke. Months before anyone in Ashcombe knew. He looked toward the house. Eleanor is Rosamond's daughter, and somewhere upstairs, Eleanor Vale, heir to Ashcombe House, daughter of the Vale family in the eyes of the world, still believed the dead woman in the library had threatened only her father's reputation. She had no idea that Lady Beatrice's final story had been about her. Chapter 7. What Beatrice meant to reveal Eleanor did not believe Major Fane. Then she believed him all at once. There are truths that enter the mind slowly, through argument and evidence. Others arrive by recognizing the look on another person's face. Eleanor stared at Adrian Fane. You knew? Not at first? How long? Since you were 12? And my father? Edmund knew from the beginning. My mother? Margaret could not have children. Edmund and Margaret took you in privately after Rosamond's confinement. Your birth was registered elsewhere. It was meant to protect everyone. Everyone except me. Fane flinched. Yes. Eleanor turned to Lydia. You are my aunt. Lydia's eyes filled. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but you didn't. No. Did everyone in this house know who I was except me? Clara whispered. I didn't. Stephen Bell shook his head. Arthur Pell said nothing. Eleanor saw that. You knew. Pell's silence was answer enough. She left the room. No one followed. Even Miss Marple thought there are moments when company becomes another form of cruelty. The revelation transformed the manuscript. Lady Beatrice had not merely been reopening a village scandal, she had been preparing to expose a false family history maintained for 22 years. Yet Miss Marple remained troubled by Beatrice's note. The story is not an accusation, It is a confession. Whose confession? Harcourt asked. Lady Beatrice's, Miss Marple said. You think she caused Rosamond's death. I think she believed herself responsible. What distinction are you making? A rather important one. They found the real final chapter that evening, not in the study, not in Beatrice's bedroom, in the old orangery. The clue came from an ivory page marker found in Beatrice's bag, carved in the shape of a tiny bird. Clara remembered seeing a matching ornament in the orangery writing desk. Beatrice had restored the abandoned building the previous spring. Inside the desk, beneath a false drawer, lay 23 handwritten pages. Beatrice's true ending. Harcourt read it alone first. Then he brought Miss Marple in. The confession was simple. 22 years earlier, Beatrice had stolen Rosamond Lee's manuscript. Not literally at first. Rosamond and Beatrice had worked together. Beatrice had provided social observations and plot ideas. Rosamond had supplied structure, dialogue, and the central mystery. When a publisher showed interest, Beatrice submitted the work under her own name, intending to explain later. Success came too quickly. Reviews praised Beatrice's brilliance. Money followed, then fear. Rosamond demanded recognition. Beatrice agreed to share credit privately, but refused public confession. Their friendship became war. On the night Rosamond died, she told Beatrice she had kept early drafts proving authorship. Beatrice followed her to the orangery. They argued on the exterior steps. Rosamond said she would go to London with Arthur Pell the next morning. Beatrice grabbed the leather folio containing the drafts. Rosamond pulled back. The strap broke. Rosamond lost her footing. She fell. Beatrice saw her lying below, alive. This was the detail that made Harcourt stop reading. Alive? Miss Marple nodded. Beatrice had climbed down. Rosamond was conscious. She whispered, "Fetch Stephen." Stephen Bell was not yet the family doctor, but was staying in Ashcombe while assisting his father. Beatrice ran toward the house. Then she stopped. If Rosamond survived, everything would be exposed. The stolen novel, the quarrel, the theft. Beatrice stood beneath the yew trees for perhaps 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Then she went for help. When they returned, Rosamond was dead. Beatrice spent 22 years believing that those 3 minutes had killed her. But the confession contained something more. A question. Did they? Beatrice had recently obtained her old solicitor's records. Rosamond's injuries should not, according to a later medical opinion, necessarily have been fatal within minutes. Someone else had visited the orangery between Beatrice's departure and her return. Rosamond may still have been alive. Who? Harcourt asked. Beatrice did not name the person. She wrote, "I have spent half my life believing that cowardice made me a murderer. Now I suspect cowardice merely made me useful to one. Tomorrow I shall place 6 people in one room and read them a lie. The person who corrects it will tell me the truth." Harcourt stared. A trap. Yes. What lie? Miss Marple turned the pages. The manuscript, Beatrice read aloud, differed from the confession. In the fictional version, the dying woman was said to have whispered a single name before death. Edmund. But according to the old records, Rosamond had been unconscious when Stephen Bell's father arrived. No last word had ever been officially recorded. Beatrice invented it. She intended to watch the 6 guests. Whoever knew Rosamond had spoken after the fall might react. Did anyone? Harcourt asked. Miss Marple thought back. The reading, the faces, the shifts of posture, the silence. Arthur Pell had been watching the manuscript. Lydia had been staring at Beatrice. Fane had looked angry. Dr. Bell had stared at the floor. Eleanor had looked confused. Clara had dropped her pencil, but that could mean anything. Harcourt frowned. Beatrice died before she could finish the trap, perhaps. What do you mean, perhaps? She read the invented name before she collapsed. Yes. So someone heard it. Yes. Did anyone react? Miss Marple looked at the handwritten chapter. There is another possibility. What? Someone had already read it. Harcourt stiffened. Arthur Pell had revealed knowledge of the confession scene. He had blackmailed Beatrice. He had lied about seeing the manuscript. Page 87 came from Pell and Company paper. Everything pointed toward him. Too neatly, Miss Marple thought. And yet sometimes murderers were obliging enough to be guilty when evidence suggested it. The next discovery came from Clara. She entered carrying a wastebasket. I found this in the old furnace room. Inside lay scraps of burnt paper. Most were blackened beyond use. One fragment remained legible. It bore typing from page 87. And on the reverse, written in blue pencil, was a printer's instruction, reset to match author copy. A.P. Harcourt looked at Arthur. The publisher's initials. Arthur laughed, but there was no humor in it. Anyone could write that. Perhaps. You've been looking for a rope since yesterday. Now you've found one. Miss Marple picked up the fragment. The handwriting was block capitals, not evidence, but the blue pencil itself was distinctive. Arthur Pell always carried one. Editors did. Harcourt searched him. His pencil was missing. Where is it? I don't know. When did you last have it? Yesterday afternoon. Convenient. Arthur stood very straight. If I planted the page, Inspector, why would I leave my own company's watermark on it? Harcourt replied, because you didn't expect anyone to inspect the paper after Beatrice's death, appeared to confirm the supernatural coincidence. Arthur looked toward Miss Marple. She was not watching him. She was looking at Lydia Crow. Lydia had begun to tremble. Mrs. Crow? Lydia pressed a hand to her mouth. I remembered something. What? During the reading, when Beatrice said, Rosamond had whispered Edmund, her eyes moved across the room. Someone said, very quietly, no, she didn't. Harcourt rose. Who? Lydia's face had gone white. I don't know. Think. I couldn't tell where it came from. Man or woman? A man. Major Fane looked at Dr. Bell. Dr. Bell looked at Arthur Pell. Arthur looked at neither. Lydia whispered, but whoever said it knew Beatrice had lied. Somebody in the library had heard Rosamond Lee's real last words. Somebody had been with her after Beatrice left her alive, and that same somebody might have killed again 22 years later. Chapter 8. The Wrong Ending. Lady Beatrice's famous death sentence was not the last sentence she ever read. By morning, Inspector Harcourt could prove it. The reconstructed timing showed Beatrice had continued for approximately 2 minutes after the inserted page. Lydia remembered the clock passage. Clara now remembered Beatrice turning a page after the supposed death sentence. Even Eleanor, once prompted away from Arthur Pell's dramatic declaration, recalled her aunt saying, "No one hears a lie more clearly than the person who knows the truth." The impossible coincidence dissolved. Lady Beatrice had not died upon reading a prediction of her death. She had died shortly afterward. Arthur Pell had told everyone otherwise. That fact alone nearly condemned him. I was mistaken, he insisted. You were very specifically mistaken, Harcourt said. I was shocked. You also knew about the confession scene, because I had seen part of the manuscript. At last, Arthur rubbed his eyes. Yes. When? 2 weeks ago. How? Beatrice sent me chapters 6 through 9. Clara said sharply. She did not. She did. Through whom? Privately. Why? She wanted me frightened. Harcourt said, Did you alter page 87? No. Did you copy the sentence from the winter guest? No. Did you place poison in her lozenge box? No. Every denial sounded less effective than the previous one. Then Miss Marple asked an apparently irrelevant question. Mr. Pell, when did you begin using blue pencil? He stared. What? Editorial pencil. All my life. Do you sharpen it with a knife? Usually. Interesting. Harcourt waited until Pell had been removed. What is interesting? Nothing yet. Miss Marple asked to see the burnt scrap again. The blue marking had a broad, waxy edge. Arthur's pencil, when one was found in the pocket of his overcoat later that morning, produced a narrower line. Someone had imitated an editor's mark. The evidence against Pell had been planted. Not all of it. His lies were real. His blackmail was real. His knowledge of the manuscript was real. But someone wanted those true facts to carry a false conclusion. Who knew he used blue pencil? Harcourt asked. Everyone who has ever seen him edit a page, which includes Lady Beatrice, Clara, possibly Eleanor, Dr. Bell perhaps, Major Fane if he reads proofs, Lydia less likely. They returned to the lozenge. That was the actual murder weapon, in practical terms. The fatal preparation had to resemble Beatrice's normal digestive sweet, closely enough that she swallowed it without suspicion. Who could create such a thing? Dr. Bell had knowledge. Arthur Pell had opportunity in London. Clara knew the brand. Eleanor bought them. Major Fane had industrial connections. Lydia, Miss Marple stopped. What does Mrs. Crowe do besides dressmaking? Clara looked puzzled. She makes preserves for the church sale. Anything else? Sweets sometimes. Barley sugar. Peppermints. Why? Harcourt stared. Miss Marple frowned at him. Please don't look so pleased, Inspector. Capability is not guilt. They questioned Lydia. She laughed bitterly when shown the silver box. Yes, I can make a peppermint. So can half the Women's Institute. Did you know Beatrice used these? No. Are you certain? Lydia hesitated. She offered me one once. When? Last Christmas. That put her back among the possible suspects. Then the chemist in Market Basing telephoned. Eleanor had indeed purchased Beatrice's usual packet 8 days earlier, but she had purchased 2 packets. Eleanor stared when confronted. Yes. Why 2? One was for Aunt Beatrice, one for Stephen. Dr. Bell blinked. For me? You complained of indigestion after dinner at the Grange. I don't remember. I put them in your medical bag. Bell shook his head. They weren't there. Then someone removed them. Harcourt's gaze sharpened. A second packet provided the murderer with perfect, harmless models. Where had they gone? Bell's medical bag had been left in Ashcombe's front hall for nearly an hour on the afternoon before the murder. Arthur Pell had passed it. Lydia had passed it. Major Fane had used the telephone beside it. Clara had moved it from one chair to another. Again, everyone. But Miss Marple was no longer thinking about opportunity. She was thinking about words. No, she didn't. That whispered correction during the reading. Who would know Rosamond had not said Edmund? Someone present after the fall. Beatrice had left Rosamond alive. Who arrived during those missing 3 minutes? Old statements placed Major Fane walking toward the village. Pell claimed he had left Ashcombe at 6:30, though his honesty was poor. Stephen Bell was at his father's surgery until summoned. Lydia had been on the footpath and heard Beatrice arguing earlier. Edmund had not yet arrived. Leonard Wren was at home. There was, according to every surviving account, no one, unless one account was false. Miss Marple asked Harcourt for Rosamond's letters. The last letter to Adrian Fane contained the line, "Come at 7." Fane claimed he had arrived at 7 and left 10 minutes later. But Beatrice's confession placed her own confrontation at approximately 7:10. That meant Fane and Beatrice should have crossed paths. Neither had ever said they did. Harcourt summoned Fane. The Major admitted it quickly. I lied about leaving. Again, I went into the orangery. When Beatrice was there. You saw them together? Yes. Why conceal it? Because Rosamond told me to. Fane's voice roughened. I was inside. They were arguing outside. Rosamond knew I was there. Beatrice didn't. Why hide? Rosamond wanted me to hear Beatrice admit the theft. Then you witnessed the fall. No. Fane looked ashamed. Rosamond told me to take the manuscript drafts and leave by the rear path. She was afraid Beatrice would seize them. I did. Where are they? I burned them after Rosamond died. Lydia made a strangled sound. Why? Because I was a coward. The word echoed Beatrice's confession. I thought exposure would make Rosamond look like a schemer. I thought it would destroy Edmund's family, destroy Eleanor before she had even begun her life. Beatrice begged me. I agreed. So you helped preserve Beatrice's fame? Yes. Were you with Rosamond after the fall? No. Did she have last words? I don't know. Then why did someone say, no, she didn't? Fane looked bewildered. It wasn't me. Harcourt believed him. Miss Marple did too. Not because he was a gentleman. Gentlemen lied as readily as grocers. But his shame had a shape, and it was not the shape of this murder. That night, Miss Marple visited the library alone. She sat in Arthur Pell's chair, looked toward Beatrice's chair, then toward the bookcase where Dr. Bell had stood. toward the desk where Clara had sat, toward Lydia by the door. She imagined the manuscript falling, Dr. Bell rushing forward, Eleanor screaming, Arthur speaking. My God. She died exactly as the woman in the story died. The manuscript had fallen closed enough that Arthur could not have read page 87 from his chair, yet he knew the sentence. Because he had seen the manuscript earlier, that proved knowledge, not murder. Then Miss Marple remembered something else. Dr. Bell had crossed the room first. He had knelt beside Beatrice. He had moved the fallen manuscript aside with his foot. At least, that was what everyone had said. Everyone except Dr. Bell. In his first statement he had said, I never touched the papers. Miss Marple went upstairs and knocked on Eleanor's door. May I ask you one rather personal question? Eleanor, red-eyed, nodded. How long have you and Dr. Bell been in love? Eleanor stared. Since before my aunt died. Still silence. Miss Marple's voice remained gentle. People hide medicine for many reasons, my dear. Doctors hide it for patients. Men sometimes hide it for women they love. Eleanor sat down. 3 years. Did Lady Beatrice know? Yesterday. And did she approve? Eleanor gave a broken laugh. She said Stephen was old enough to be my father. Miss Marple looked at her. Something in the sentence chilled her. How old was Dr. Bell when you were born? 26. And was he in Ashcombe then? Yes. Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly. There had been one assumption nobody had questioned, that Major Fane was Eleanor's father because he had loved Rosamond. But love and paternity are not the same thing. She opened her eyes. Did Major Fane ever actually tell you that he was your father? Eleanor looked confused. No, he said I was Rosamond's daughter. Exactly. The mystery had changed once again. Chapter 9. Everyone heard something different. The gathering in the library began at 8:30 the next evening. Inspector Harcourt disliked theatrical reconstructions. Miss Marple disliked them too. Unfortunately, murderers sometimes needed an audience before they understood the performance had ended. Eleanor sat where she had sat during Beatrice's reading. Major Fane stood near the fireplace. Lydia remained by the door. Clara sat beside the desk. Arthur Pell occupied the armchair. Dr. Stephen Bell stood at the bookcase. The empty chair beneath the reading lamp belonged to Lady Beatrice. Miss Marple looked at it for a moment. Then she began. Lady Beatrice did something rather cruel before she died. She invited 6 people here and gave each reason to be afraid. Arthur Pell laughed softly. That is hardly news. No, but it was deliberate. She wanted fear because fear makes people careless. Harcourt leaned against the desk. Miss Marple continued. Mr. Pell feared exposure as a blackmailer. Miss Wren feared disgrace for her father. Major Fane feared the truth about Rosamond. Mrs. Crowe feared further injury to her sister's memory. Eleanor feared losing the only identity she had ever known. Her eyes moved to Stephen Bell. And Dr. Bell feared something else. Bell smiled faintly. Are we to guess? No. Miss Marple folded her hands. Lady Beatrice's manuscript contained a lie. It said Rosamond Lee whispered Edmund Vale's name after falling. Lydia nodded. During the reading, a man whispered, No, she didn't. Arthur said, You cannot prove who. No, but one does not always need the words themselves. One needs to understand who could know they were false. Bell's expression remained calm. Major Fane was at the orangery. Before the fall, Pell was there, earlier. Beatrice herself knew. She was reading the lie. Bell shrugged. Then perhaps Lydia imagined the whisper. Lydia stiffened. Miss Marple said, That is possible. Memory is unreliable, which brings us to the supposed impossible death. She looked at Arthur. Mr. Pell told everyone Lady Beatrice died on the sentence describing a novelist dying while reading. She did not. Arthur's face hardened. I have admitted being mistaken. You were not mistaken about knowing the sentence. You had already read that section of the manuscript. Yes. And therefore, when Beatrice collapsed shortly afterward, you naturally connected the two. Your melodramatic remark fixed the idea in everyone's mind. So, I created the legend accidentally. More or less. Harcourt looked at Miss Marple. but said nothing. This was not what they had discussed privately. Miss Marple continued. Page 87 was false. It was typed on Pell and Company paper. Someone wanted suspicion directed toward Mr. Pell. Arthur smiled. At last. Don't look too relieved. You are still a blackmailer. His smile vanished. Who planted it? We shall come to that. Miss Marple turned to Clara. You altered 5 pages to protect your father's memory and Eleanor. Yes. Then someone stole several of those pages and hid them in Eleanor's room. Again, evidence designed to create suspicion. Clara nodded. The murderer was arranging a great many little arrows pointing everywhere. Why? Because the true method was extremely simple. Lady Beatrice swallowed a poisoned lozenge before she began reading. Bell said, "We know. Do we?" His gaze met hers. The fatal preparation resembled the lozenges Eleanor purchased. A second packet went missing from your medical bag. Anyone could have taken it. Yes. Then this proves nothing. Not alone. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Nothing in a good murder case proves very much alone. She looked at Major Fane. You believed Rosamond was carrying your child. Fane's face changed. I knew she was. How? She told me. Did she tell you the child was yours? Silence. Fane's jaw tightened. No. Eleanor stared at him. You let me think. I said Rosamond was your mother. Nothing more. Why? Because I didn't know. Miss Marple turned to Lydia. Did Rosamond ever tell you? Lydia began to cry. She said the father could never publicly acknowledge the child. I assumed Edmund. Everyone assumed Edmund. Eleanor looked toward Stephen. He had not moved. Miss Marple's voice became very soft. Except perhaps Stephen Bell. Harcourt spoke. Dr. Bell was 26 when Eleanor was born. He was already working with his father in Ashcombe. Bell laughed. Surely we are not going to solve murder by inventing romances. No, said Miss Marple, by finding old ones. Harcourt produced a letter. It had arrived that afternoon from a nursing home in Bath, where a retired midwife named Agnes Hume still lived. Rosamond had given birth privately under another surname. The physician present was young Dr. Stephen Bell. The birth record named no father, but Agnes Hume remembered an argument. A young doctor pleading with Rosamond to let him arrange money. Rosamond refusing. Eleanor's hands began shaking. Stephen, Bell said, old women remember nonsense. Miss Marple's eyes hardened. Some of us do remarkably well. He looked at her. For the first time, anger appeared. Miss Marple continued. Rosamond was not killed because of a stolen novel. That quarrel brought her to the steps, but it did not necessarily kill her. Beatrice left her alive. Bell said nothing. Rosamond asked Beatrice to fetch Stephen. Still nothing. Why Stephen? Not Dr. Bell Sr. Stephen. Eleanor whispered, because he was the father. Bell closed his eyes. Miss Marple nodded. Yes. The room seemed to contract. You reached Rosamond before Beatrice returned, Miss Marple said. No. Your father's surgery log says you left at 7:14. The orangery is 4 minutes away by bicycle. That proves I could have. Rosamond was alive when you reached her. No. She told you Beatrice had caused the fall. She also told you she intended to expose the stolen books and take Eleanor away from Ashcombe. Bell's face became rigid. Miss Marple's voice remained almost tender. You were 26, frightened, ambitious. Your father had arranged your future, a scandal involving a servant's child, stolen manuscripts, and the Vale family would have destroyed it. Arthur Pell stared. You killed Rosamond, Bell whispered. No. You did not push her. You found her injured. Perhaps badly, perhaps dying, but instead of helping, you ensured she would never speak. No. Lydia rose. You murdered my sister. Bell turned on her. I did not. The force of his shout made Eleanor recoil. He saw her face. Something broke. He lowered his voice. She was dying. Miss Marple said, You have told yourself that for 22 years. Bell's breathing became uneven. She was bleeding. Her breathing was wrong. She had minutes. You cannot know that. I was a doctor. You were a frightened young man. Bell looked at Eleanor. She said she would take you away. She said Beatrice would be exposed. My father would be exposed. Everyone. His words stopped. Harcourt said quietly, "What did you do?" Belle's lips moved. No sound came. Then he sank into a chair. "I gave her something." Eleanor covered her mouth. Belle stared at the carpet. "To stop the pain." "Enough to stop more than pain?" Harcourt asked. Belle closed his eyes. Yes, the old murder was solved. But Harcourt did not move to arrest him. Not yet. Miss Marple said, "Lady Beatrice discovered this recently." Belle looked up. She guessed. "And you knew she guessed. She confronted me yesterday." There it was. A motive. A doctor with knowledge of poisons. Access to the missing lozenges. A man who had killed once to preserve Eleanor's life as he believed it should be, and now Eleanor was the woman he loved. Harcourt stepped forward. "You killed Lady Beatrice." Belle shook his head. "No, you had every reason." "I didn't. You removed the second packet of lozenges from your bag." "No, you stood nearest her after she collapsed." "Because I am a doctor." "You lied about touching the manuscript." Belle stared. "I never touched it." Miss Marple looked sharply at Harcourt. There it was again. The statement that had bothered her, not because it was false, because it might be true. She turned toward Arthur Pell. "Mr. Pell, after Beatrice collapsed, did Dr. Bell move the manuscript?" Arthur frowned. "I thought he did." "Did you actually see him?" "No," Clara said. "I didn't." Lydia shook her head. Eleanor whispered, "Neither did I." Miss Marple looked at the empty chair. The manuscript had fallen. Arthur had been the next person nearest it. He had bent down. Miss Marple had told him not to touch it, but that was after he had already extended his hand. What if he had touched it before anyone noticed? What if page 87 had not been inserted before the reading at all? Miss Marple's face changed. Inspector Harcourt saw it. "What?" She looked toward Arthur. "The page." Arthur went pale. Miss Marple said, "We have made the same mistake with page 87 that everyone made with Lady Beatrice's last sentence." Harcourt frowned. "Which is?" "We assumed it was part of the manuscript while she was reading." Arthur stood. "No." Miss Marple's voice sharpened. "You placed it there after she fell." Every eye turned. Arthur backed away. "You cannot prove that. Perhaps not from the manuscript." She looked at his hands. "But there is a more ordinary thing." His right thumb bore a tiny cut. A paper cut. One he had claimed to receive opening correspondence that morning. Miss Marple had noticed it the night of the murder, fresh, before the morning correspondence existed. "You had page 87 folded inside your jacket. When Beatrice collapsed, you moved first toward the manuscript. You slipped the page among the fallen sheets. Then I told you not to touch them." Arthur's face had become expressionless. Harcourt said, "Why?" Miss Marple answered, "Because Mr. Pell knew Lady Beatrice had been poisoned." Silence. "And because he needed her death to look like part of the story." Arthur looked toward the door. A constable stood there. Miss Marple continued, "But Mr. Pell did not kill Rosamond." She looked at Stephen Bell. "And Dr. Bell did not kill Lady Beatrice. Two murderers, two different crimes, 22 years apart. And at last, every lie in Ashcombe House had found its proper owner." Chapter 10. The Story. Beatrice really wrote. Arthur Pell confessed because there was nowhere left for his cleverness to go, not immediately. He first called Miss Marple's theory sentimental nonsense. Then he accused Stephen Bell. Then Clara. Then Eleanor. Finally, when Inspector Harcourt produced the London evidence showing Arthur had purchased ingredients through a private chemist under a false name 3 weeks earlier, the performance ended. "I did not intend it to become so complicated," Arthur said. Miss Marple almost smiled. Murderers seldom did. They sat in the library the following morning. Ashcombe looked different in daylight. The windows were pale with winter sun. The fireplace had gone cold. Lady Beatrice's chair had been removed. Arthur spoke without looking at anyone. Beatrice had decided to confess everything: the stolen books, Rosamond, the money she paid me. "The blackmail," Harcourt corrected. Arthur's mouth tightened. Yes, for 17 years he had demanded payment, at first small sums, then larger. Beatrice paid because Arthur possessed photocopies of Rosamond's early manuscripts and correspondence, proving that Beatrice's reputation rested partly upon another woman's work. "Why kill her now?" Harcourt asked. "A confession would incriminate you in blackmail, certainly, but hardly justify risking the gallows." Arthur gave a tired laugh. "You think the payments were the whole of it. They were not. Arthur had used Beatrice's money to cover losses in his publishing company. He had also falsified accounts, borrowed against royalties, diverted trust funds. If Beatrice publicly exposed the blackmail, auditors would examine everything. Pell and Company would collapse. Arthur would go to prison. My entire life was built on keeping her quiet," Miss Marple said, just as hers was built on keeping Rosamond quiet. Arthur looked at her sharply. Yes, that was the symmetry Beatrice had perhaps intended. One act of cowardice breeding another. A stolen story producing a stolen life. Arthur had read chapters 6 through 9 after Beatrice sent them to his office deliberately. She wanted him frightened. She wanted each guest frightened for a different reason. But Arthur went further. He entered the study before dinner and read enough of the final pages to understand that Beatrice intended to reveal his blackmail. He searched her desk. He did not find the handwritten confession. He did find her schedule for the evening and saw the silver lozenge box in her open handbag. Arthur knew her habits from decades of public readings. He had already taken the second packet of ordinary lozenges from Dr. Bell's unattended medical bag and prepared one substitute. He placed it in Beatrice's box. "How could you know she would choose the altered one?" Eleanor asked. Arthur looked away. "I removed all but one of her original lozenges, placed the substitute on top, then returned the harmless ones beneath it." Harcourt's expression hardened. Arthur continued. "When she took one before reading, I saw which one. The rest was theatre." Arthur had typed page 87 in London from old material, borrowing a sentence from The Winter Guest because he knew it would sound convincingly like Beatrice. His original plan was to insert it before the reading. He lost his nerve. He kept it folded in his pocket. Then Beatrice swallowed the lozenge. At that moment, Arthur knew the murder had begun and could not be recalled. While she read, he waited. The poison worked more slowly than expected. Beatrice passed the point where Arthur had intended the planted passage to appear. Then she collapsed. "In the confusion," Miss Marple said, "you saw another opportunity. You slipped page 87 among the fallen sheets and immediately announced that Beatrice had died exactly as the fictional woman died." Arthur nodded. "People believed me because it was terrible enough to be memorable." "Yes," Miss Marple said. "People often remember a good story better than an accurate one." He had later burned the rejected duplicate sheets. He planted a scrap marked AP to create the appearance of an overly obvious clue he could dismiss as a frame. He hid copied manuscript pages in Eleanor's room. He relied upon the fact that almost every person in Ashcombe already had a reason to lie. "And the blue pencil?" Harcourt asked. "I took one from Clara's office and shaped the mark to resemble mine." Miss Marple nodded. "Too broad." Arthur gave a faint, defeated smile. "You noticed." "Eventually." Clara asked, "Why did you tell everyone she died on the sentence if you knew she hadn't?" "Because once you give frightened people a dramatic explanation, they begin arranging their memories around it." Miss Marple looked at Harcourt. "That is true in villages too. What gave him away first?" Eleanor asked. Miss Marple considered. "Not one thing." She looked around the room. Mr. Pell knew Beatrice's habit with the lozenge. That was natural. He knew the confession scene, despite claiming he had not read it. Less natural. He recognized a sentence that Beatrice had not actually reached at the moment of death. More troublesome. The page came from his company's paper, which looked like evidence against him but was almost too convenient. Arthur said bitterly, "Yet you still suspected Stephen." "I considered him." Stephen Bell had not spoken since the confession about Rosamond. He sat apart. A man who had carried one death for 22 years and had just learned that secrecy had protected nothing. Eleanor looked at him only once. It was enough to show that whatever love had existed between them had not survived the night. Harcourt said, "And Beatrice's trap?" Miss Marple unfolded the real final chapter. She meant to expose Dr. Bell. Stephen closed his eyes. She knew Rosamond had spoken because she found an old note written by Stephen's father. The note recorded that Stephen had arrived at the surgery that night distressed, saying, "She asked me not to let Eleanor belong to them." That sentence had never been in the official records. Beatrice deduced that Stephen had reached Rosamond alive. She invented the line about Rosamond whispering Edmund's name to see whether Stephen would correct it. He did. "No, she didn't," Lydia whispered. Stephen covered his face. "I didn't realize I'd spoken aloud." "No," Miss Marple said. "Fear does that. It pulls thoughts out of us." Beatrice had intended to confront him after the reading, not publicly. Her final chapter made that clear. She did not want another scandal. She wanted the truth placed before Eleanor and Lydia. She planned to give Stephen a chance to confess. Would she have forgiven him? Eleanor asked. Miss Marple looked at the handwritten pages. "I don't know. Would you?" It was not a fair question. Pain seldom asks fair ones. Miss Marple answered gently. "Forgiveness and justice are not always the same thing." Eleanor turned away. Major Fane stood beside her. Lydia took her hand. 3 people linked by a dead woman whose name had been whispered through Ashcombe for 22 years. Rosamond Lee had lost her work, her future, her child, and finally her life. Yet the truth about her had survived in fragments. Letters, drafts, memories, a photograph, a sentence spoken at the wrong moment. That afternoon, Inspector Harcourt took Arthur Pell and Stephen Bell away in separate cars. Arthur would face trial for Beatrice's murder. Stephen would face an investigation into Rosamond's death. The law would decide what 22 years did to evidence and responsibility. Ashcombe itself would face another judgment. The newspapers came. Beatrice Vale's reputation collapsed almost overnight. The Winter Guest and Death at Candlemas were reissued months later under 2 names, Beatrice Vale and Rosamond Lee. Lydia received Rosamond's share of the royalties and placed them in trust for Eleanor. Eleanor refused Ashcombe House. Instead, she sold it. Some villagers called that tragic. Miss Marple thought houses were less important than villagers imagined. People liked to believe old houses preserved families. Often they merely preserved secrets. Before leaving Ashcombe, Miss Marple visited Eleanor at the station. A small suitcase stood beside her. "Where will you go?" Miss Marple asked. "Somewhere no one knows who my father is." Miss Marple smiled. "That may be difficult." Eleanor looked alarmed. "Why?" "Because eventually people will ask." Eleanor almost laughed. Then she did. It was the first unguarded sound Miss Marple had heard from her. "I suppose I'll tell them I don't know." "That is allowed." The train whistle sounded. Eleanor hesitated. "Miss Marple?" "Yes, dear." "My aunt was a thief, a liar. She let Rosamond die because she cared more about herself than another human being." "Yes." "And then she spent 22 years trying to live with it." "Yes." "Was she a bad person?" Miss Marple looked down the railway line. Steam drifted beneath the iron roof. "People are very rarely one thing all the way through." Eleanor waited. Miss Marple continued. "Your aunt did something wicked, then she did something cowardly. Later she became ashamed. At the end, she tried to tell the truth. None of those things erases the others. So what does that make her?" "Human, I'm afraid," the guard called. Eleanor kissed her cheek and boarded. Miss Marple watched the train depart. On the seat beside her lay a parcel Clara had given her that morning. Inside was a copy of Beatrice's unfinished final novel. The false page had been removed. The true ending remained handwritten. Miss Marple opened to the last paragraph. Beatrice had written, "We imagine stories are dangerous because they contain lies. The greater danger is that a story may tell the truth before we are ready to recognize ourselves inside it." Miss Marple read the sentence twice. Then she closed the manuscript. At the far end of the platform, a porter dropped a trunk and blamed another porter who had not touched it. A woman insisted she had been waiting 10 minutes when she had arrived only 3 minutes before. 2 sisters argued over which of them their mother had always preferred. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Murder was exceptional. Human nature was not. And that was why, Wherever she went, the stories never truly ended. And so the final page of Lady Beatrice Vale's story closes, not with the neat ending she had once imagined for herself, but with a truth that had waited 22 years to be heard. Rosamond's voice had been buried beneath reputation, fear, and carefully repeated lies. Yet one forgotten manuscript, one careless whisper, and one elderly lady, who listened more closely than anyone realized, finally brought it back into the light. If you stayed with us all the way to Ashcombe's final secret, thank you for sharing this mystery with us. Do tell us in the comments which clue first made you suspicious, and whether you believed Arthur Pell, Dr. Bell, or someone else was responsible before the truth was revealed.